Okay, good. So, all right. Because we're starting a series on Shmittah, so I thought that it would be the right thing before getting into the different halachos, and we'll get into some today also, but to give an introduction. And the introduction, you have to start from the Pesukim. Okay, yes. Already a question.
What does Shmittah mean?
Yes,
What does the word actually mean?
let's talk about that.
Not so clear.
Let's talk about that. Shmittah means the word itself, like we find, for example, in Shmitat Ksafim, right, which is the monetary release that one has to do during the Shmittah. Yes, Shmittah means to release. Lishmot. Shmot means to release, to let go. All right? Like if something is nishmat mimeni, it fell from me. Or it can even be nishmat from my memory, released or lost. So it means to release. Okay? And let's see some of the Pesukim, because I think the best way to introduce the sugya and also to get into the halachic dilemmas that we'll speak briefly about today, we should start from the Pesukim. So the first time that we find Shmittah is in Parashat Mishpatim, okay, in Shmos. It says as follows: V'sheish shanim tizra'is ha'artzecha. Okay, 6 years sow your field. V'saftos also you gather the produce. V'ashvi'it, on the 7th year, tishmetena unatashta. So to a tishmetena, you release it. Unatashta is to abandon it. All right. Netisha is abandonment. Okay, so there are two things here. On the one hand, to release the land, tishmetena, and on the other hand, to abandon. And what's going to be the consequence of that? V'achlu evyonei amecha. And the poor of your land will be of your nation, of your people, will be able to come and to eat the produce. And whatever's left will be eaten by the animals of the field. Okay, so we have over here, and we'll see this as we proceed along the halachot of Shvi'is. We have on the one hand a concept of releasing the field, meaning not working it, allowing it to rest, to remain fallow, and another netashta, which is abandoning it. And this is going to be the first source for the idea of hefka, the idea that we have to allow others to take the produce. Not only must we not work the land on Shmittah, but we also have to allow the produce to be eaten by anybody who wants. Okay, and this will have a discussion of this concerning gardens, right? You have a fruit tree in your garden. What do you have to do to allow people in to come and take your lemons and your pears and your olives or whatever you might have in those secret gardens in Ramat Bet, right? So that's the first source for that idea is netashta, and then v'achlu evyonei amecha. Okay, so on the one hand, tishmetena, meaning allow it to rest, don't work it, like we'll see later on in Vayikra, and also netashta. Now, I brought the next pasuk here also, because this is very significant. The next pasuk in Parashat Mishpatim is Sheishes Yomim Taseh Ma'asecha Uvayom Hashvi'i Tishbos, right? 6 days you do your work, and on the 7th day you rest. And I think it's very clear over here from the Pesukim that there is a parallel, right? There's a correspondence between Shmittah and between Shabbos, right? Just like Shabbos is 6 days you work and the 7th day you rest. So also on Shmittah, you have 6 years of working, and the 7th year you leave fallow, you rest. But like we'll see later, the idea of Shmittah is not so much your resting, but rather the resting of your field, right? The land has to remain fallow, right? We'll see that in greater depth in Vayikra. In any case, a very clear parallel between Shabbos on the one hand and Shmittah on the other, and we'll speak a little bit more about that in just a moment. The other very interesting thing is that over here we find that Shabbos also is a social benefit from Shabbos, right? We have a godly idea of Shabbos, right? In the Aseret HaDibros, right? There it says, first of all, in Bereshis, right? Vaychal Elokim b'yom hashvi'i malach Torah vayishpos b'yom hashvi'i makom malach Torah vayvrech Elokim es yom hashvi'i vaykadesh, so right? We have the sanctity of Shabbos because of Hashem's resting, right? And that we also have that in the Aseret HaDibros, right? V'shomer b'nei Yisrael es Shabbos. Hashem created the world in 6 days, and on the seventh he rested. So also we do, right? So our Shabbat is a parallel to Hashem, right? Like the Ramban explains, that we rest from creative activity on Shabbos, right? Just like Hashem created the world in 6 days, and on the seventh he rested from his creation. So also we have 6 days of creativity, and on the seventh day we rest from that. That's on the one hand. This pasuk in Mishpatim and also in Dvarim in Parashas Vayeschanan speaks about the resting on Shabbos, leman yanuach, in order that everybody should rest. Shorcha v'chamerecha v'yinafesh ben hamascha v'hager, meaning people who don't always get a chance to rest whenever they want, they'll be able to rest over here. You, as a landowner, you can go on vacation whenever you want, but there are some people that can't, right? The slaves, the servants, the ger, meaning someone who's weak socially, and therefore he's somehow subjugated to others. He can't rest whenever he wants. So Shabbat allows him to do so. And these two ideas of Shabbos, on the one hand, something which is divine, right? A limit, a boundary on our creativity, right? There's a day of Shabbos, which is a day of Hashem, right? Shabbos la Hashem, the Pasuk says. So also Shmittah, like we'll see in a moment, is called Shabbos la Hashem. It has that dimension also. It's a boundary on our dominion, if you want, over the earth, right? There's a boundary on our dominion. We own the land, we work it, but out of 7 years, there's one day on which we declare really that the land is God's, right? Shabbat la Hashem. That's on the one hand. And on the other hand, we have this social benefit that goes to help the Evyonei Amecha, those who don't have, right? Just like on Shabbos, those who are unable to rest. So also here, those who don't have anything to eat. So here, it's as if they own it, right? Everything is theirs. And I think it's wonderful insight that both of these ideas go together, meaning the idea of the limits on our ownership, on our dominion over the earth is also the benefit for those in society that don't have, whether it's on Shabbos, that they're able to rest, or on Shmittah, that they're able to enjoy the fruit, the produce of the fields everywhere. Okay, so just like on Shabbos, these two things go together, also on Shmittah. Okay, it's a general introduction. We'll see more about this in the following Pesukim. Reza, do you want to read a bit? Vayikra? Give me a break. I can. Let's see the Pesukim in Vayikra. Yes. By the way, the only pasuk in the Torah, right, where we find this, Vaydaber Hashem al Moshe b'Har Sinai. Okay, it's quite remarkable, and that's why Rashi, famous Rashi. What does Rashi say here? Ma inyan Shmittah etzel Har Sinai. Right? Rashi asks, what's Shmittah got to do with Har Sinai? How does Rashi answer based on Chazal? Yes. Good stuff, Steve. Thank you very much. That's correct. Right? Just like we have the Klalim in Har Sinai, so all of the Pratim, all of the particular halachos were also given from Sinai. And nevertheless, even after Rashi's answer, it's still remarkable that specifically Shmittah is the halacha that is specified as coming from Har Sinai. And maybe we'll speak a bit later about why when we see the Pesukim in later on in Vayikra, in Parashas Bechukosai. Anyway, what does it say here? Sorry, I interrupted you.
Amen. Dayan b'nei Yisrael amar Dayan ki zavu el haaretz asher nisim lachem v'shavsa haaretz Shabbos laHashem.
So here it's very explicit, right? Shavsa haaretz, Shabbos laHashem, right? Just like the Pesukim in Yeshayahu, right? Ki tashiv mishavas raglecha aseis chafutzecha b'yom kodshi. It's my day, right? The day of Shabbos is the day of Hashem. So also here, the rest of Shmittah, right? The release of the land. This is for Hashem. It's a Shabbos laHashem, right? I think it's also remarkable. In which way is a Shmittah Shabbos laHashem? Because it indicates or it represents the fact that the land is not entirely ours. Yes, it's ours, right? Hashem gave it to us. We can use it. We can derive benefit from it. We can try to extract the maximum produce from the land, and it's ours, and no one else is allowed to steal it from us, and we can inherit it onto our children and grandchildren and so on. But nevertheless, there's a boundary to that dominion, a boundary to that ownership. And that's the statement of Shabbos during the week and Shmittah, right? Shabbos laHashem. And that's where these halachos emerge from, derive from. Okay, so again, in Shmos, we saw the other side, here we see Shabbos laHashem, very clear. Ezra, it's clear?
Yeah.
Clear, let's carry on. Sheish Shanim. Is this a chiyuv? Do you have to do this? Right? So this is very similar to what it says in concerning Shabbos, right? Sheishes yomim tavoid v'asisa chomen achtecha, right? And then v'yom hashvi Shabbos laHashem elokecha lo'isasa chomen lecha, and so on. But do you have to work on the 6 days? So Chazal certainly understand there's no chiyuv to work. Okay, and also over here, if you don't have a field, and even if you do have a field, there's no chiyuv. Chazal do not understand that this means a chiyuv. However, it's the way of the world, right? It's the way of the world to work 6 days a week, and it's a way of the world that if you have a field, you work the field, you derive whatever you can from it, right? And it's also possible to say, as Torah Tmima suggests, that there's also something which is a positive statement. Yes, it's not a chiyuv, but is there a mitzvah to work the land? Chasam Sofer says in his Chidushim to Maseches Sukkah, right? Chasam Sofer says that Artzecha, your land, there's a mitzvah to work the land. And he says it not only, that's a Chiddush, Chasam Sofer says not only working the land, but any work in Eretz Yisrael, income, labor, working in Eretz Yisrael, that itself is a mitzvah. So that's a special chiddush of the Chasam Sofer. He's speaking about the balance between Talmud Torah on the one hand and earning an income on the other. And he says if in Chutz La'aretz we can be dedicated to Talmud Torah and diminish our work, but in Eretz Yisrael it's a special mitzvah. At the very least, you see in the Pesukim, yeah, working your land, there's something special, there's a Dvar mitzvah involved. Kadosh Baruch Hu wishes us to work the land and to derive its produce. We say this twice a day, every day in Kriya Shema, right? Our ability to work the land and to derive benefit from its produce is how Kadosh Baruch Hu wants us. That's a situation that Hashem wants us to have, right? And Nefesh Chaim is worried about this because based on Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai, right? How can this be lechatchila? Surely Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai says that the lechatchila is that you don't do any work and everything gets done by others. That's a local problem in Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai. But the simple reading of the Pesukim is certainly that this is a lechatchila. However, there's no chiyuv. The chiyuv is, what do you do on the 7th day? So yes, Ezra, over Shana Shvius. Right, Shabbos Shabbosin, where do we find that expression, Shabbos Shabbosin? Shabbos before Pesach, not sure. Shabbos Shabbosin. It's true that the Torah uses it once concerning Shabbos generally, but specifically the Torah uses it concerning Yom Kippur, right? Yom Kippur is called Shabbos Shabbosin, and I think it's wonderful that also here in Shmittah the Torah uses the expression Shabbos Shabbosin, and there is something, Yom Kippur dik, if you want, about Shmittah, that just like on Yom Kippur we transcend our general human nature, right? So also on Shmittah, the Torah demands from us to transcend on a certain level our ordinary nature, right? I mean, we don't work. Don't forget, this is going to work. By the way, can we imagine not going to work for a year? So just think about that for a minute, right? I mean, right? A person goes to work, right? And I mean, we can imagine it because we say, okay, never mind, we'll send our wives to work. But no, not you and not your wife. No one goes to work. Okay? This is when an agronomic society, meaning it's an agricultural society, right? This is work. You're not going to work for a year. The mind boggles, right? It's just something which is extraordinary. And that's why I think there is something Yom Kippur-dik. There's something which is reminiscent of Yom Kippur. The Torah asks us on Shmittah to transcend our ordinary human nature and to engage for a year in a more elevated way of life, in a way of life that's different. And of course, it's difficult, like the Torah is going to say in a minute. We'll see the Pesukim in a minute, and the Torah itself asks the question, how is it possible? So we'll see.
It doesn't transcend our existence any more than Shabbos does, though. No, I mean, you don't have to go to the level of Yom Kippur to say, obviously, the Shabbos Shabbosin appears in both, so there's a connection. But I'm saying, as far as transcending our normal existence, you don't have to say it's more comparable to Yom Kippur than it is comparable to Shabbos.
Right. Well, Shabbos is a day of rest during the week, and I think the idea of Shabbos is a very intuitive idea.
Mm-hmm.
And my proof of that is that it's caught on. Like, there isn't any society in the world that doesn't have a day of rest. In France, they once tried doing 1 day out of 10 instead of 1 out of 7, and it didn't work. The people ultimately rejected it. This is in the French Revolution, when they were very scientific and rational, and they said, hey, this doesn't make sense to do 1 in 7 days. It's not rational. We're going in base 10. We should have 1 rest day every 10 days. That did not last long for obvious reasons. But apart from occasional experiments, all of humanity has 1 day of rest in every 7 days. But Shmittah did not catch on. So we see that Shmittah is something special, meaning it's something beyond what you would expect from the ordinary human condition. The ordinary human condition does demand a day of rest, so it seems. Shabbos caught on, while Shmittah did not. Mm-hmm. So it's, again, does that mean it's comparable to Yom Kippur? Yom Kippur, not to eat or drink is definitely on a different madrega than not to go to work in terms of the physical composition, in terms of our physical makeup. But nonetheless, there's also something transcendent about not working for a year. It just goes against the grain of humanity in a way that Shabbos doesn't. Okay, but I'm interrupting you. Carry on. We are now in Pesukim. Yes. Very good. So over here we have already the certain malachos, right, that the Torah mentions. Okay, which malachos have we seen over here? We have Zriya, right? We have sowing, right? We have Zriya. Zriya is a malacha d'oraisa on Shmittah. You're not allowed to sow. Okay, what else do we have? Zriya, excellent. That's right. There's a corresponding malacha for grapes, which is over here. It's tizmor, right? It's Zmira. and Zmira is a Tolada Doraisa, right? Absolutely. And then, right, Sfir Ketircha Loi Tiktzar, Ktira, right? Ktira, harvesting, right? The two main Aves Malacha, like we'll speak about, I guess, next week, right? The two main Aves Malacha of Shmittah are sowing on the one hand and harvesting on the other, right? And those also have Toldos, we have over here, right, Tizmar, Sheshanim Tizmar Karmecha, which is a type of Zriya, it's causing it to grow, right? Pruning causes it to grow, or causes it to grow better.
This text is once Tizmor be any more of a tolda than Tizra. Should they be at least equal? Saying
Right.
just one's for Sada, one's for her.
Well, no, because you can do Zmira also for other trees. Regular
okay.
trees you can also do Zomer. And because they're the same idea, so the Gemara separates them into Aves and Toldos. But they're both Deraisa, just like Aves Malacha and Toldos are also even though this is relevant for the Gemara in Baba Kama, what's called the Av, what's called the Teilada. We'll get to that in Mir Hashem next week when we speak about. But here we see the principal malachos, right? The big malachos of Shmittah are related to sowing, right, and related to harvesting. Those are the main malachos. Okay, and now we have the pasuk that's very similar to what we saw in Shmos. Vezra, please. Right. And then for animals also. Right. Now we have well, let's give a couple of Pesukim here. Yes.
You're over the mixer.
Well, that is an excellent question, and we'll see that in a moment. And what Avi is actually asking is a very important question, and that is this a mitzvah which is a Gavra-oriented mitzvah? You are not allowed to work the land on Shmittah, but you're allowed to leave others, let's say, to work it. Let's say a non-Jew, all right, somebody who's not Jewish, he can work the land on your behalf or on his own, and you don't have to stop him. Or is it an issue of your land, right? It's a Chefza-oriented mitzvah. Well, your Eved is your extension. He would be doing it on your behalf, right? A ger, or right. Right. So they're clearly not, this pasuk is clearly not speaking about when then they're doing the work on your behalf, but rather they're just eating the produce, right?
Correct, but the Pesukim was properly says
right. Well, absolutely. It's a good question. I think, like I mentioned before, it means that the ger is the guy that doesn't have his own land. He's not a landowner. Who is landowners? Who are landowners? Those who entered Eretz Yisrael in the time of the original conquest of Yehoshua bin Nun, right? But what about a ger who came in later? He doesn't have his own land. So he has no option other than to become a worker, right? A worker or a, if he's lucky, it could be a sharecropper, I guess. But, generally speaking, he'll be a laborer, like a day laborer, and therefore you're allowing him to rest. So the ger is your classic day laborer who's renting out himself for work. He's not the landowner. Yeah, that's your laborer. Schicha is presumably a Jewish laborer because the whole pasuk here is speaking about Jews. And yeah, a guy that lost his land, he well, here he doesn't own the land. Oh, what are you asking?
No,
yes.
Even if it's your land, I didn't have the feeling anymore because it won't be sold on.
Right.
I still can't work. You may have thought, there's an exemption for me because I don't own land. It's still my land, I don't own it, I can't work it.
It's your land, you can't work on it. Neither can your sachir, but your sachir is now allowed to eat from it even without having to do his work and to get a salary from you, right? The land, as it were, is shared. The produce of the land is now shared by everyone, even by the ger, even by the sachir. The sachir and the ger are the unfortunates, the guys who have a hard time. Yes. It's a good point. It's a good point that before it doesn't mention the sachir.
But that makes sense what you're saying.
Right.
The sachir says you get to share the produce.
Right. Interesting.
The land didn't have the land that to own it. You say that. You have to say that.
First of all, good point. I didn't notice that here it mentions sachir, tishav. All right, good. Now let's go to pasuk chof. All right, and this is it's remarkable. Again, there's nowhere else in the Torah that we find this question. The question of what if it's tough? Many mitzvahs are tough. Keeping Shabbos, in America in the 30s, that was tough. People got fired every week because they didn't work on Saturdays, right? A lot of mitzvahs can be very hard to fulfill, and yet the Torah doesn't ask any questions. But over here for Shmittah, we have a question. Yeah, Rebezra, take it away. What are we going to eat? Hein lo nizra. So what does the Torah answer? Why 3 years? 6 is you need. Right, meaning the fact that you're leaving the 7th year fallow means that you're going to have a partial problem in the 7th year. You're going to have some produce from the 6th, but you'll have a partial problem in the 7th. And then because you're leaving the 7th fallow, you'll have a partial problem in the 8th. So the Torah from the 6th year is going to have to provide you it's going to have to solve all of these problems, right? Steve, could you pass the water, please? Thank you. It got stuck with Avi. I'm just a laborer here. Let's get my water. So yes, I think that this is very indicative of what we mentioned before, that the mitzvah of Shmittah really requires us to do something which goes beyond the ordinary range, the ordinary capabilities of human beings. We could also add a question. What are we going to do for a whole year? You're not going to work. Don't forget, people work the whole day long. The Gemara says in Brachos, right? What's the standard? The standard is you leave home at sunrise or a bit before. You have to get to where you work by sunrise, and you come home at sunset, and then you go to sleep. This was what people did. What are you going to do for a whole year? Every day you don't go to work. It's remarkable. I think it's just remarkably educational. It's like a real education, that once in 7 years, you're able to step back and to be with family, to be with HaKadosh Baruch Hu, to be with Torah, and to just, be able to reflect. Anyway, that's my question. The Torah doesn't ask that question. The Torah asks, what are you going to eat? And the Torah's answer is a remarkable answer. HaKadosh Baruch Hu will give us the hashgacha. There's a machlokes rishonim. Is this a good question or a bad question? Should we be asking this or not? My inclination is to say it's a good question, meaning if the Torah is presenting it as a legitimate question, then it's okay to ask it. It's not saying you're a naughty boy for asking the question. There's an opinion that says, no, if you wouldn't ask the question, then you wouldn't even need this special nace. If things would work out, as it were, without having a special nace. But if you ask the question, then HaKadosh Baruch Hu has to give you a special answer. I think the Pashat Pshat, though, is that the question's a legitimate question because the Torah is really asking us to transcend our ordinary human way of life. But the answer is that when the Torah asks us to do such a thing, to transcend our ordinary way of life, then the Torah also provides us with a solution. Then the Kadosh Baruch Hu, this is just part of relationship with the Kadosh Baruch Hu. Kadosh Baruch Hu isn't a cruel God. He doesn't demand. One of the reasons why the Torah says, right, in Dvarim, that Kadosh Baruch Hu expects us to serve Him and not to serve other gods. And why not? And the Torah says, "Ki gam es b'neihem ve'es b'noseim heviru ba'esh le'Eloheim." Don't do like the other nations of Canaan. Why not? Because they sacrifice their children to foreign gods. So what? Yeah, don't go that way. That's a way of idolatry. It's a way of cruel gods. It's a way of gods who are not in relationship with, in connection, in intimacy with you. The difference between the pagan system of many gods and the Jewish system of one God isn't just a question of numbers, many against one, right? Monotheism versus a whole pantheon of gods. It's also a difference in kind, right? The pagan gods are gods that are very demanding. They want us. They want whoever serves them to give them something, and then they give back. It's a give and take, right? It's a, you'll give me this and I'll give you this. Kadosh Baruch Hu is not like that. It's not a give and take. It's a relationship. And if Hashem tells us to leave the 7th year fallow, not to work, then Kadosh Baruch Hu, then Hashem will provide for us. And that's what the Torah is telling us. It's a relationship. It's not going to starve. We're not going to, Kadosh Baruch Hu is not going to, doesn't want human sacrifice. He doesn't need that service. He wants our good, and this is part of our good. It's part of our good because it gives us boundaries, and we need boundaries for our good, right? It's important for us to know that we have boundaries, and we need those boundaries to allow those who are less fortunate than ourselves to enjoy our own land. That's part of the boundaries that HaKadosh Baruch Hu sets on our property. Anyway, it's just amazing Pesukim in Shmittah. Unique Pesukim in Shmittah. Yes, Avi.
The Bible to say that it's an opportunity for us to share the land with others. Is that correct?
Well, yes, it's an opportunity for us to, number one, to recognize the limits of our ownership, right? Of our dominion, if you want, over the earth, and that's Shabbos LaHashem. And a part of that recognition is to allow those who are not as fortunate as we are and don't own land to enjoy the privileges of owning land. They're allowed to come and eat from the produce. So those are the two elements that we saw before, and they go together. And that's just part of a good society, of a good life. And if you'll ask the question, okay, what are you going to eat? Kadosh Baruch Hu will provide. If you follow the guidance of a Kadosh Baruch Hu in creating this good society, then a Kadosh Baruch Hu will give you the bounty that will empower you to do that.
Problem is the way that the brachas come from the 6th year.
Yes.
Where you would have done that last 6th year.
Yes.
Which is therefore not, let's say, the sharing and all that advice, because
Wow, but that produce grows in the 7th year. Right.
It sounds like we have a lot of stuff in the 6th year. And then that's where so when you're in the 6th and last for 3 years, rather than saying there's going to be so much in the 7th year, even if you did work there, which therefore we've gone down the point, yes, we're sharing it because everyone's down. But just to really say, you have a bump crop in the 6th year, you won't have to really work the next 2 year bump. Next year.
Well, yeah, absolutely. Avi, you're absolutely right. That's the pshat in the pasuk. You'll have a bumper crop in the 6th year because you've got a question. I've got, my big family. I've got 8 kids, but you could have more, right? You've got your family, you've got your kids, and on regular years, you get by. You get by. All of a sudden, you've got to share your crop with anyone who wants to come and take it. How are you going to get by? How do you manage? The answer is, don't worry, you'll get a bumper crop in the 6th year.
Would you have to share that?
On the 6th year, no.
That's what I'm
6-year crop is yours. You don't have to share it.
Exactly. So your crop is coming from the 6th year.
Yes.
And the whole
Yes.
you want to share. The crop is coming from the crop you're not.
Well, because on the 7th year, you're sharing and you're living that ideal of the good society, then on the 6th year, you have enough that you'll be able to share your 7 and still have plenty. Well, again, it's a good question, Avi. You know, maybe the Torah expects, maybe you would say that the Torah expects you on the 7th year to be just like the poor people, just like they have to go around fields and pick their produce from wherever they can. So you try that also, you know, go around to different fields. Says the Torah, no, you won't have to do that. You won't have to live like, you know, like poor people or like beggars who have to go around to all the hefker fields and take the lemons from the thwaite and go to, you know, take some pears from the, I don't know who, from the Altshulas, have avocado, I don't know what they have. No, you won't have to do that. You'll have your bumper crop. But yeah, you're right. That is a good emphasis of the pasuk. It's your bumper crop on the 6th year, which also invites a question: how will it store well? And then that's also part of the hashgacha, that it'll store well. All right. Goodness. Let's see also Dvarim, even though this is going to speak about Shmittah's Ksofim, which is a different element, but Pesukim are Pesukim, and it obviously goes together. So thank you, Rav Ezra.
Pleasure.
Fine job. Avi, you want to give us Dvarim? Yes, please. Again, so at the end of 7 days, 7 years, then you have Shmittah. Also a very Mikate Sheva Shanim. It's as a cycle, as it were, right? Every 7 years you have Shmittah, which is also a very interesting statement, right? Before we know what Shmittah is, the next pasuk is V'zeh Dvar Shmittah, right? But it's like there's something axiomatic, right? After 7 years, you have Shmittah. Well, over here, it's actually something else. It's going to be speaking about Shmittah's Ksofim. But I would just mention that also in Vayikra, we have something very similar. Just look back a minute to Vayikra. Look at this pasuk. It's remarkable. When you come into the land, then v'shafsa haaretz. What do you mean v'shafsa haaretz? First, you've got to wait 6 years, and then the 7th year, right? Well, that's the next pasuk, right? Sheish shanim. But before that next pasuk of Sheish shanim tizras hadecha, the Torah already tells us, as soon as you come into the land, v'shafsa haaretz. It's telling you, as it were, that the whole purpose, right, or the foundation of your coming into the land rests on that concept that the land is going to rest. Meaning your conquest of the land, your dominion of the land is defined by Shmittah, right? It's defining, right? It's as you come in, the land shall rest. Now, in fact, what actually happens is, for 6 years, you plant your field and so on. But even before we reach those details, we've got that defining statement. And also here, right? Mikate Sheva Shanim Ta'aseh Shmittah. Okay, well, what do you have to do? All right, I'll tell you what you have to do. But first of all, there's a concept of this release, a concept of this border, this limit on human dominion. But in this case, it's a very different limit to the one we saw before. Before we saw a limit on the work of the land, and over here we see an extension of that limitation to a different area. So let's see these Pesukim. Avi, please, go ahead. Masheh Adoi. Yes, Masheh Adoi means from the lashon of a nosheh. A nosheh is a creditor, right? So V'zeh Shmittah Shamot, release, right? Kol ba masheyado, any debt that you have as a creditor, sheyashe bere'eu, that you lend in this case. Right? Yeah, sorry, go ahead, Avi. Few more Pesukim, yes. Tashmeit yodecha, right? So you have to release, not only do you have to release the land, and like we saw before, to allow others to enjoy it, but even your debts, meaning the debt that people owe you, right? As a creditor, even those have to be released on the Shmittah year. Kikara Shmittah la Hashem, right? Because again, it's Shmittah la Hashem, right? There's something divine over here. Again, the limits on human dominion over here, it's not dominion over the land, it's dominion over money or over others in a certain sense, right? Like the Gemara says that Eved loive leish malve, right? A loive, a borrower, is enslaved to the creditor, and over here you have to release that element of property through which you enslave others. This isn't a total release. It's not Yovel, right? Yovel is a total release where actual slaves go free and property goes back to its original owners. That's Yovel. We're not speaking about Yovel here. However, it's a partial release, right? It's a release of those elements of property that enslave others. So on the one hand, your land, right? Your land, and like we saw before, you have the schircha and the teshavcha, the ger, and so on, that they work for you, so they get to rest, and the land remains fallow. And over here also, those who are enslaved to you by means of property, in this case not your land, but rather your money that you've lent to them, and therefore they're enslaved to you by virtue of their debt. So also this has to be released. Also in this sense, they go free. And the Pesukim carry on and tell us that this will be a bracha to you. Let's skip most of these other Pesukim. I'm going to mention the end of this because it's similar to what we saw in Vayikra. Let's see Pasuk Tes. You won't give him, right? Because you're afraid that Shmittah is coming, then you won't lend him money, right? By the way, it's very clear over here that the way in which we're expected to help our brethren, right, is not by giving them donations, but by giving them loans, right? And that's why, and that's why when it comes to Shmittah, then you say, hey, I don't want to help him out. I have an idea, just give him the money instead of lending it to him. No, we don't want to give people money. We want to give them loans, right? Why do you think that is? Why is the loan the preferred way in the Torah of helping people rather than giving donations? Right, an element of dignity. I definitely agree. It's more dignified to take a loan than to take a donation. Absolutely. I think beyond that, why is it more dignified to take a loan? Because having a loan means that I'm actually standing on my own feet. I'm not dependent on you. I take a loan to get me going, right? It's an investment in my business or whatever. Then I'm able to stand on my own feet and to pay you back. And ultimately, I'm not using your money. I mean, I'm using it for a time, but I'm paying it back, and then I'm independent. And the Torah wants us to be independent, to stand on our own feet, not to be dependent on others in the sense of donations, in the sense of charity handouts. And that's why in the Torah, every time where it speaks about helping out poor people, the understanding is a loan rather than a charity donation. And that's why ribbis is such a big deal, right? Not to take ribis, not to take interest. Because if you take interest, then when you give someone a loan, well, you're not really helping them out. You're still enslaving them to you because they're going to have to pay interest. But that's all parenthetically. That's in practice.
So the really the process that person to be back to money.
Well, and that's why the Rambam says that the most mahuda, and he says it by far, he says it's a different category of tzedakah, is to establish a person and help him to have his own business, his own income. And that's just a different level of tzedakah. Yes, some people won't be able to make it, and then you have to give them donations and so on, and they'll be dependent. But that's not what the Torah wants. The Torah wants each person to stand on his own feet. And
the way we work is someone was poor and he was able to get back, he got back on his feet and everything. Then his responsibility to actually repay the loans to people.
Sure, of course. Well, to repay tzedakah.
No, but that's what I'm saying. It's simply will come from the practice of the loan, and he talks about tzedakah.
No, but that is tzedakah. In the Torah doesn't use the word tzedakah. Tzedakah is, I mean, it uses the word tzedakah, but it means something else in the Torah. In the Torah, like it means you'll have grace. Hashem tells Avraham Avinu, right? Vayamen b'Hashem vayachshaveh aloi litzedakah. Right. Right.
But the mitzvah that we get comes from this Pesukim. That mitzvah comes from here.
Well, yeah, but it's a new form, meaning Chazal. This is mainly Baba Basra. Daf Yud, Chesed, right? Those sugyas in Baba Basra that speak about tzedakah. That's a kind of new construct. The concept of
you give someone
loan. The Torah concept of tzedakah as we know it now is a loan.
Okay,
yes, is a loan. Absolutely. That's every place where the Torah speaks about helping out poor people. The Torah speaks about loans. How do we know? Because every time that the Torah speaks about it, the Torah says, and don't take interest. So you see that the Torah is referring to loans. Yes, absolutely. Technically, you should give loans and then they'll pay them back. We don't do that so much. We don't give loans so much. It's a kind, yeah. It's a different idea. It's worth a discussion, but we're not. We've got to push on though, because otherwise we won't even finish the Pesukim. So what does it say, right? You'll be afraid that you're going to lose out your loan because in the 7th year you're not going to get it back, right? Right? It says the pasuk no, give him his loan. Don't worry. Hashem will bless you, he'll give you a bracha. So, the Torah is telling us, don't worry. Just like we find before, that if you'll do Shmittah properly, Hashem will bless the 6th year. So also here, if you'll take care of the poor by giving them loans, and in this case, it means that you stand a good chance of losing the money. He's not going to pay it back because the 7th year is going to come and that's going to cancel the loan. All right, it'll be a release. Nonetheless, give the loan. Did this work out historically? We know that it didn't. Right, Gittin tells us that Hillel was metaken a prusbul. Right, what is a prusbul? Prusbul is a way of circumventing. It's not nice to say, but it's a kind of loophole, right? It's a halachic loophole of getting around the problem of Shmittah. And that's very understandable because the economy changed. The economy became an economy that was money-based rather than agriculture-based. And then loans just became, everything. You can't live without loans. And presumably, that's part of why it became impractical for people to be able to adhere to the Pesukim. Maybe they should have. Maybe they, should have been stronger. I don't know. But for whatever reason, Hillel saw that this was not being done. And insofar as it's not being done, then the purpose of the Pesukim, which is to allow the poor people to get their loans wasn't being fulfilled. And what was happening was, it wasn't working. And therefore, we needed to have the principle to enable people to continue giving loans, even though Shmittah came. So it's an interesting example of the Torah urges us to do something, but historically it didn't work out. Is there a mitzvah to do a principle? Should we all, every time when we get principle, by the way, when do we do it? At the end of Shmittah. Okay, not at the beginning of Shmittah, the end of Shmittah. That's how we paskin, that the end of Shmittah is Meshamet rather than the beginning of the Shmittah. And every time at the end of Shmittah, you see people rushing to do principles. And sometimes they ask these people, like, do people owe you so much money? Like, what's going on? He said, I don't know, maybe. Like, I'm doing the principle because maybe someone owes me money. No, that sounds a bit weird to me. If no one owes you money, you don't have to do a principle, because it's sad that someone might owe you money. If someone owes you, and if someone owes you just, a little bit of money, 20 shekel or something, you don't have to do a principle. Allow Shmittah to kick in and to cancel your 20 shekel loans. If someone owes you, all right, a few thousand shekel or a few tens of thousands of shekel. Okay, I get it, right? Principle, okay, it's mutter, the Hillel was mataken, it's all good. But still, we have a doraisa here of allowing Shmittah to release the debts. If you have small debts, I would go with the Torah. It's let me just do one final set of Pesukim, and then maybe we'll get to some halachic sections. And this is Parshas Bechukosai. All right, and what did the Pesukim say over here? Right, in Bezois Le'Tishmuli. Steve, would you like to read the Pesukim? Bekeri, meaning you'll go with me. Bekeri in a way of chance, right? Keri represents a lack of loyalty, a lack of fidelity, a lack of being consistent with the Kodesh Baruch Hu. And then v'halachti imochem, I will go with you. B'chamas keri, meaning I will act with you in the same way that you acted with me. With anger, like yes, with a rage of keri. And here it's very harsh. This is very harsh rebuke, admonition, right? You'll eat the flesh of your children. Your sons, your daughters to chilu. Yeah, sorry, carry on, Steve. I'm sorry. Let's skip to Pasuk Lamed Beis. It's gonna, Lamed Beis. Vashimoisi ani esa aretz. I will allow the land to be destroyed. Vashimoisi mean the land will be in a state of desolation. It will be desolate. Right, meaning that your enemies who will settle the land, they won't enjoy it. The Ramban says that this pasuk is a bracha, that the land will not give its produce to the goyim, to the non-Jewish enemies who settle it. The land will save its produce for you when you come back. Anyway, and what will happen to you? Ve'eschem ezoreh b'goyim, I'll scatter you among the nations. Right, harikosi acharechem chorev. Right, and all of this, why? Why is all this happening? Right? And so Pasuk Lamed Daled tells us why all this is happening. Right, then the land will as it were, it will compensate, right? It will ritzoi, it will right, leratzot, it will appease, right? This will be an appeasal, right? The the land will be appeased of its Shmittah years, right? Et Shabsesea, its Shmittah years, right? Kolumei Hashama, while it's in desolation. V'atem be'eretz oivechem. Az tishbas haaretz, then the land will rest. V'hirtzas es Shabsesea, it will appease its Shmittah years. This is just unbelievable, right? The desolation of the earth, the desolation of the land will be will appease those Shmittah years that we didn't keep, right? Kol yemei hashama tishbot et asher lo shafsa b'shabsoseichem b'shiftechem alea. In that the land did not rest while you were dwelling upon it. So again, just we see from here again the tremendous centrality of the idea of Shmittah, right? The centrality of Shmittah, that Shmittah is a time that really sets us straight, that sets us on the path that Hashem wants us to walk. And that path is knowing that our dominion over the land is limited. You know, I just can't help thinking about Karuna when I read these Pesukim. You know, in a world that we've been so accustomed to having absolute power, absolute dominion over the world, that man has become all-powerful, right? He can do everything he wants. He doesn't have any limitations. He doesn't have any boundaries. In science, we're looking for the theory of everything to explain everything. And in technology, we're looking to conquer the world, literally, to the point that people such as, I don't know, Yuval Noah Harari in one of his books speaks about, yeah, we're going to a stage where we'll conquer death. We won't die anymore. You know, that's the mindset. Obviously, he takes it to an extreme because that's his nature. But even if you don't take it to that extreme, it's the mindset of the West. It's the mindset of Western society. And then all of a sudden you have coronavirus and you're just not in control. Everything goes wrong. And I just hope that we're not just going to bounce back to where we were before. And we'll learn a lesson from here, that we have boundaries. And this is what the Torah teaches us in Shmittah, that we have limits to our dominion. We have limits. We have Shabbos every week. We have Shabbat, right? One day a week. But over here we have on a global sense, right? Shabbat is in a very personal sense. Don't go to work. Over here we have it on the global sense, as it were, in the sense of the world, right? In a worldly sense, that the entire world has to rest for a bit. You know, realize that you're not in charge, that you have a limit, you have boundaries. And if you don't, then the land will take its revenge. The land will need to be appeased, right? As tirtzeh haaretz, es shabsosea. Let me speak very briefly. Avi, what's the time range? It is, I know. What does that mean?
Not much.
It means it's 10 o'clock. Well, when is Rabbi Adlerstein arriving? Right. That's a good question. So let me just mention very quickly this Chakira, so I wouldn't have to do it next week, okay? This Chakira is a very important fundamental Chakira investigation concerning Shmittah. And that's what Avi mentioned before, okay? Is it all about me or is it all about my land? Is the Isser of Shmittah that I'm not allowed to work the land, or is the Isser of Shmittah I'm not allowed to allow the land to be worked, okay? Now, we'll just look back very quickly at the Pesukim. So on the one hand, and in Vayikra, the Pesukim in Vayikra, okay? So on the one hand, it's very clear that there's the lo saseh, right? The prohibition is on me, right? Sadcha lo sizra. You mustn't sow your field. Very clear, right? You mustn't do something. You do not sow your field, right? V'chamacha lo tizmar. Sfer keterecha lo tiktzar. In vein izerecha lo siftzar. Very clear, right? All of this is very clear. the question is, what about the mitzvahs aseh, right? And we call that's the los aseh, that's the negative mitzvah. But what about the positive mitzvah? And on the positive mitzvah, it says, Shna Shabbosoin Yeh la'aretz, right? It shall be a Shna Shabbosoin for the land. And over here, it speaks about the land. It doesn't speak about you, right? It doesn't speak about us, it speaks about the land. And the Minchas Chinuch derives from here. The Minchas Chinuch is in several places in the Sefer HaChinuch. It's in a number of mitzvahs. I've just copy pasted one of them over here, which is in mitzvah Kuf Yud Beis. And here he says, look at Ois Beis, right? Letter Beis, do you see it? He says, V'dai, you should know, the Shvi'is, Be'inyan Echad, in one matter, Chamura Mishabas for Yom Tov, right? Shmittah is more severe, has a certain severity beyond Shabbos and Yom Tov, right? Because on Shabbos and Yom Tov, he says, right? Aval alidei goy hurak shvus, right? On Shabbos, he says, the Isra is for you to do a malacha. What about if you tell somebody who's not Jewish to do the malacha? That's only the Rabbanon. That's only a shvus. It's only rabbinic. Let's skip to the end of the column. Ubishmita, he says, Im oisa avodas haaretz kegon shechoresh sadeu uzurea oikoitzer. We'll speak about charisha next week, whether that's a deraisa or not. Big machlokes rishonim. But we'll speak about that next week. But zurea koitzer, right? Let's say you do that alidei goy. So nihida loita said the negative commandment of avodas haaretz eino that you haven't done yet. Called ksiv lenoichach sadchole tizra. And so on. Ach ba'aseh, on the mitzvah aseh, he says, Oiver b'chol avodas karka, afilu al yedei acherim, even through others. Tichsev Shabbat Shabbatoin, right? Shabbat Shabbatoin yeh la'aretz, right? V'shafsa ha'aretz. Mevuar, he says, based on the pasuk, right? Usually we don't have to go back to Pesukim. We have Mishnah, Gemara, Chazal, Rishonim, I don't know. Minchas Chinuch says, I've got a pasuk. There's kishmak, right? He's going back to Pesukim, and he's telling us that because of these Pesukim, I know that there's a doraisa even to allow the goy to work your land. The gaza rakasov the aretz tishbois. Just like on Shabbos, you're not allowed to allow your animal or your kelim, if you be shammai, to have work done with them. And therefore, Hamaske Lugoy, Oile Israel, Hasade, over Hamaske, Mishum Shvisa Sadeu. All right, if you rent out your land to a non-Jew, to a Jew, then the masker, the person who's renting out the landowner, he is going to transgress the mitzvah. Okay? Remarkable stuff. Now, the Chazon Ish argues strongly against, I didn't bring it here, but you'll believe me. The Chazon Ish argues strongly with the Minchas Chinuch. In fact, there's also previous authorities that also speak about it. The Mabit already speaks about it on some level, and others. But in modern times, the Minchas Chinuch says this Chiddush from himself, and the Chazon Ish strongly argues with him. The Chazon Ish says, no way, he says. Just like the prohibition of the los aseh relates to the person himself, so also the mitzvahs aseh relates to the person. And if you allow your land to be worked by a goy, then you don't transgress the Torah prohibition of Shmittah. And the Chazon Ish brings a raya, one of his main proofs is from the Rambam. Okay, look at the Rambam. Right at the beginning of Hilchos Shmittah, mitzvahs aseh, says the Rambam, lishbois me'avodas haaretz. There's a mitzvah to rest, to refrain from working the land. V'avodas ha'ilan b'shana hashvi'is shenema v'shavsa haaretz shavas l'Hashem v'nema b'charesh v'katzei tishbois v'chol ha'isa malacha me'avodas haaretz o'ilanas b'shana zu bita mitzvahs aseh v'ava los aseh shenema sadcha l'tizra v'chalcha lo tizmar. The Rambam clearly writes the aseh and the los aseh together, and they both relate to a person who does labor on his field. And I think what I said now is not accurate. It's not Dafka his field, it's any field, right? We'll speak about this bli neder maybe some other time, but it seems very clear that even someone who works on a hefker field is over. There is a slight dispute about this, but I think it's very clear both from the Pesukim and also from the Rambam that anyone who does work on any field during Shmittah, he transgresses the prohibition. And I think that the Minchas Chinuch's position is a difficult position, okay? The Chazon Ish already asks on the Minchas Chinuch, and he says, according to Minchas Chinuch, you have to be careful that nothing should get planted by mistake in your field. And what about sfichin, things that grow by themselves, right? You have to be worried that nothing should grow by itself in the field, right? You have a lot of stuff that grows by itself. It says, according to Minchas Chinuch, you have to prevent it, asks the Chazon Ish. So you could say no. The Minchas Chinuch doesn't mean you have to prevent your field from things growing by itself. You need somebody to do it. It could be a goy, could be yourself. That's the Isser, not things that grow by themselves. But I think beyond that, what one can really ask on the Minchas Chinuch, because if the idea is that that the land needs to rest, the land mustn't grow anything. So even things that grow by themselves should be a problem.
You're resting the land. You're doing your part of resting the land.
Right, meaning no human investment. Right, that would be, I think, the potential answer to the Chazon Ish's question. Right, you're doing your part. No human investment, no human effort is being made into making things grow. If things grow by themselves, that's all right. I agree. That would be, I think, the answer that the Minchas Chinuch would give to the Chazon Ish's question. But I think beyond that, Shmittah isn't about my land or about someone else's land. It's about land in general. And, do I have to stop a non-Jew from working his land? Meaning I have to go and stop him from working land? It's not about my land. Also here it says, right, it says, Sodcho le'sizra, right? Don't plant your field. Fair enough, it's my field. And the Torah tells me, don't plant your field. But then in the Mitzvahs Aseh, the Torah says, Shna Shabbosoin yeh la'aretz, the land. The land generally, not just your land, all the land. Right? The idea is that all the land should rest.
The Rabbis quite clear saying that.
Right. And in that case, I think the Minchas Chinuch is just a very difficult position because, if a non-Jew works, if there's a problem with non-Jews working land anywhere, then you would have to stop them from doing any work on any land. And there's no difference. The Minchas Chinuch is saying if a non-Jew works on your land, then you get an Isser. I think that's very difficult. You get an Isser D'Oraisa. I think that's very difficult. There's no difference between a non-Jew working your land or working his land or working Hefker land. Just because he's working on your land, that shouldn't give you an extra Isser. But I think the Minchas Chinuch nevertheless has a point that we see in the Pesukim that the idea is that the land should rest. I think the Chazon Ish is right l'halacha, meaning, and like you see in the Rambam and also in other Pesukim, that if a non-Jew is going to work the land, you're not going to have an Issa D'Oraisa. But yes, the Minchas Chinuch has his finger on the pulse of Shmittah, in the sense that the Torah wants the land to rest. He wants us to not work the land, but the general idea is that the land needs to rest. And I think the most powerful expression of that is the Pesukim that we read in Bechukosai, in the Teichecha. The land itself takes its vengeance. The land needs to be appeased, right? The land is going to be appeased by kicking you out and by being left barren and in a state of waste and so on, right? So there is something here about the land. So like many mitzvahs, the Isser is for you to do something, but it's a mitzvah which is related to a toitzah, to a result. Right? HaKadosh Baruch Hu wants this result. He wants the land to rest. He wants us humans to leave the land alone, right? Let the land rest. And that's the underlying idea. And this gets us into a very interesting question, which I'm not going to get into now, but what happens when you have a joint property, right, between yourself and between neighbors? And those neighbors are not from neighbors, okay? And they're going to, right, you have a garden. You often have this in buildings, right, apartment complexes, buildings, and you have a joint garden, and they say, we don't really buy into the Shmittah stuff. We want to carry on working the garden in Shmittah. We want a nice garden. What do you do? According to Minchas Chinuch, you're in big trouble. You're in big trouble. And therefore, some say, based on the Minchas Chinuch, that you have to be mafke your land. First of all, does it help? I mean, can you be mafke your land? You'd have to actually, go to the registration offices and register the garden in the name of, it's Rav Elyashiv Paskin like this. That just to say my land is hefker doesn't help. There's a tabulation in Israel, right? Avi, do you own your house? Do you have a tabulation? Is it written in your name?
I hope so.
Yes, I certainly hope so. That's true. But then on the tabulation, it's written that you have. That's true. My house I own. The government gave it to me. I actually own my house, Baruch Hashem. I recommend everyone else try to do the same. You're right. It's a long-term lease.
Yes.
You have a long-term lease, but that's also written on the tabulation. Yes, Tzvi. Right, but even according to the Minchas Chinuch, even if it's a non-Jew who's doing the work, still you get a prohibition because your land is being worked on. So I don't think that that's lahalacha the Minchas Chinuch. I think the Chazon Ish is right lahalacha. But if it's Jewish neighbors, then certainly there's a big problem here, right? According to the Minchas Chinuch. But according to Minchas Chinuch, even if it's a non-Jew. Yeah, according to it doesn't make a difference. Even if it's good, it doesn't make a difference actually, according to Minchas Chinuch. But this is why I mentioned over here on the third page. You've got this is from Rabbi Weiss, who writes, you don't have to be mafkir. It doesn't really help to be mafkir because, like I mentioned before, if it's like Avi just said, right? If we're going with the Minchas Chinuch, then nothing's going to help you anyway. You can sell it and get it registered in the name of a goy. Well, Heter Mechira. We have a whole share about Heter Mechira. We'll get to it. But Rabbi Weiss writes on a very simple way, and I think very correct way. Rabbi doesn't need my askama, Muri Verebi Rabbi Weiss, and he says that it's good enough to make an objection. You should make an objection. You should say, excuse me, I object. We should leave the garden alone during the Shmittah year. We shouldn't be working it. But once you've made your objection, that's all you need to do. If they continue to work the land, then they're doing it be'isr. He's following the Chazon Ish.
It's only your responsibility not to work necessarily that land stuff has to be.
Yes, and that's why. Yeah, and that's why, and that's.
So why would I have to say to them?
Because they're doing something wrong.
That's a very different position.
Yes.
That's more like
correct. Like a chiv mecha, absolutely, right. It's like a chiv mecha. It's still your garden. Meaning it's true that they're doing the isser, but it's your garden. So you should definitely. But no, you need to make them a in order that they shouldn't be doing it on your behalf. In the other 6 years, they're doing it for you. Don't pay the gardening fees. I mean, try, or you'll get into a fight, right? So you'll pay your VAT, buy it, you'll into a fight. You're going to have to go and say, listen, this is, I object, I strongly object. When you're going to be working the garden, it's going to be against my will. I don't want you to do this. And it is important because otherwise they'll carry on doing it. And it's you that's doing it because they're doing it on your behalf. So you have to protest and you have to object. But that's it. You don't have to do any more. You don't have to be mafke your part. And yeah, you can say that my money is for the cleaning and not for the gardening. Yeah, yes, absolutely. But that's it. That's all you can say. Good. Let's leave it there for now. We'll pick this up, please God, next week for some real Halachic nitty-gritty.